Anyway, I've got Derek Shelmerdine on now. I'm going to bring him right on because now we can start talking about
Laboratory habits
laboratory habits.
in Yorkshire.
Good evening, Derek.
Who's got a Costco by you, Derek?
Sorry?
Have you got a Costco by you?
I don't think we have, actually.
Good job. You don't want to buy the mince pies out of there, mate.
I loved them.
Do you?
I loved them. And the big.
You look as though you're losing weight. Fancy being told by someone that you look as though you're losing weight and you're not on a diet or not like that. You're just going to go, oh, it's the big C, yeah. Need to be passing blood as well.
Jerry,
I think I'd take an overdose.
she says, Jerry, you look massive. Seriously, you look well done.
You can't get away from it now, Karen. You've said it now. You've already cut your own throat there, Gail. There's no getting around me now.
Evening, Derek, says Mark Kinnish.
And
Evening, Derek, Charlie Cairns.
Hi.
Well, anyway, we were talking, weren't we, about how the transition.
That's right.
Last week we were talking about the transition between, the likes of Sinatra, the Rat Pack, let's just say the Rat Pack,
Yeah, exactly.
Nat King Cole and whoever,
Yeah.
Into rock and roll.
Absolutely.
You were going to talk about the parallel, the parallel throughout, let's say the 60s, because you had Sinatra singing, I know we'll stand in line until you think those and the...
Absolutely. Strangers in the Night was a big one for him as well.
Yeah, that's right. I was trying to think of that. What was it?
Interestingly enough, a prog band called UFO called one of their albums Strangers in the Night. So, there's so much reference back to the 50s.
Yeah. So so tell us a little bit more about the parallel. You had the Beatles, you had the Stones, you had all these unbelievable bands side by side.
Yeah.
With
really interesting transition. Before the first British chart came out in the November of 52. So before that, basically music was, if you like, pretty much the same. I mean, it was big band music. It was crooners, and that's why it's called popular pop music. It was just popular music, like classical, like jazz. And what happened? In fact, if you look at the crooners, I mean, they had most of their hits. Sinatra, Bing Crosby, you could put him in the same kind of league, in the 50s. Interestingly, Sinatra actually had a lot of hits. He's one of the very few, arguably the only real crooner of that time, who had big hits right across the 1960s as well. And the other thing that's interesting as well, you look at someone like Bing Crosby, you think he's like a massive hit maker. If you look at his American output, between 54 and 62, he had, this is the top 40 Billboard, he had 8 hit singles, 6 of which were White Christmas.
So White Christmas, that's a good point, that, because every Christmas, you get, that sort of music. Are you lifting your eyebrows up there?
Look at Casey's comment, Frank, don't sing, you're spoiling a good show, and that's 2 songs you've given out.
No, hang on, I'm trying to feed the audience.
Yeah.
It's no use just saying, White Christmas. But that's a very good point, what Derek made. Out of those 8 singles, 6 of them, was it by him as well? It came back every Christmas.
No, it was his. I mean, what I find astounding was that, across that period, and so up to about 2003, which is what that particular book I looked at goes up to, that was his chart output, 8 top 40 singles. What's happened? What's interesting really is that it was in the 50s very much that everything changed. There were 2 or 3 reasons. You've got Alan Freed, a white American DJ, who back in 51 in Cleveland, Ohio, he started his R&B show. And that was one of the very first. He wasn't the only white DJ playing R&B. And then around the 1955, Rebel Without a Cause, James Dean hit the cinemas. And that's really, you could argue, when the teenager was born. You know, before that, you were just a little version of your dad. You know, you were in short trousers. But if you look at photographs of, you know, childhood on the beach at Rill, in the early 1950s, everybody, the older people are there in three-piece suits. I got one of my granddad on Real Beach in a three-piece suit, his waistcoat on. This would have been August. And, you know, the kids are all there in grey short trousers. And it was really in the mid-50s that it all really started to change. And that was also a big difference in the, well, again, R&B. I mean, R&B, rhythm and blues. I mean, basically, R&B is just danceable blues, which is how the name came about. And that really came about in the late 40s, about 47 or 8. RCA, the record label, started marketing its music of that genre in the name of blues and rhythm. And it was Billboard magazine in 1948, the 25th of June version, that changed the name of its chart to the R&B chart. Before that, I mean, segregation was rife, and even the charts were segregated. And before it was called the R&B chart in 1948, it was called the race chart. So, you know, things really changed. And it was in the mid-50s, 54, 55, that you started getting crossover hits. So big hits on the R&B charts were starting to trickle out into the mainstream Billboard Top 40. You got people like Fats Domino with Ain't It a Shame, Chuck Berry's first single, Maybelline. I mean, they were massive R&B hits. They were, both of those were #1 for 11 weeks. And they crossed over, made Fats Domino made #10 on the pop chart, and Maybelline made #5. But it was really very much a time of change then. I mean, you've got what's generally considered to be the first rock and roll record in 1951, Jackie Brenston and his Delta Cats. And Bill Haley, Rock Around the Clock, he recorded that in 54, but it did nothing. It was the B-side of a wonderfully titled 13 Women, brackets Only One Man in Town. I mean, what a great title that was. And when it was re-released after the Blackboard Jungle, 13 Women was actually the B-side of that. And the Blackboard Jungle movie was in the March of 55. Rock Around the Clock was playing against or behind the opening credits. And that very much, you could say, is ground zero for rock and roll. People were ripping up the seats in the cinemas, jiving in the aisles. And
can I come in there? You know, because you mentioned jive.
Yeah.
If you go back to the, you know, all I'm thinking of is during World War II when the Americans came over.
Absolutely.
Finally came over, you know. And when they got here, they did the jitterbug, didn't they? The jitterbug. Was that the first time that, or was it a prelude, shall I say, to the jive?
Yeah, but I'm a few dancers. I think you could argue that it goes back. Well, I'm no expert in this, but certainly the Charleston has elements, very much elements of jive moves. And the Charleston Black Bottom, I mean, they're 1920s dances. And
well, I was going to say that, you know, but I didn't want to show you up, you see, Terry.
No problem. No problem at all there, mate. And you got the Lindy Hop as well, which, you know, when you watch people doing this Lindy Hop sort of version of the jive, absolutely awesome the way they jump around. Absolutely awesome.
Well, funny enough, I was watching a clip of ELO, Rock and Roll is King, and you see them doing the jive.
Oh, it's
and
brilliant.
It's phenomenal. It really is absolutely brilliant. You know, this video of Rock and Roll is King. Absolutely fantastic it is. I might give you a little rendition of it if you don't know. Okay. Charlie Kane's got a sweet club.
The thing you go to, getting back to the big band sounds, the swing, Sinatra and all that, how popular it is today. Because you look at the likes of Robbie Williams, Rod Stewart, the fella off the Chase, and all they're bringing out, they're all them big band songs. They're all the same songs, and they're sang in exactly the same way. So even though it was popular in them days before rhythm and blues, rock and roll, and it's popular again today. My uncle was a big Sinatra fan.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Robbie Williams and Rod Stewart have both had albums called something like the Great American Songbook, going back to a lot of those sort of songs. And I think what happened really is since the 1980s, there's arguably not been much sort of brand new ground broken, you know. And I think there's a great resurgence in interest in the music of the 50s, 60s, and 70s. I mean, so many of the modern artists actually cover songs from that era. And I mean, the big band sound, it's just a great sound. And I think the whole sort of pop industry has changed dramatically. I mean, the big difference between sort of now and the 60s was you'd see a band like the Rolling Stones, you know, one of the biggest bands in the world at the time, and you'd be paying about 12 and 6.
Yeah,
you know, 2 tickets for £1 to go and see them. Because what happened in those days is that the artists used to make their money on the record sales, and the tours were just simply to promote the latest single, the latest album, and by and large they lost money on the tours. Now it's like completely different. You can pay hundreds of pounds.
There's no chart. There's no chart as such now, is there?
No. It's completely different.
Funny you should mention that, because on Saturday there was a lad come in the pub. He's our age, and he said he pulled his Taylor Swift LP out, the new one that she's just brought out. I forget what it was called. Yeah. And he said, "Have a guess how much that is." He had his hand over the price, and I said, "About 23 quid, 29.99."
Wow.
Taylor Swift's new LP, £30, 30 quid. And no one's, how are you going to play it? No one's got record players no more.
That's right. Everybody streams it now, don't they? So the artists are making a lot of money out of the music now. They've got to make the money out of the tours, which is why I think they have to charge so much for the tours.
Do you miss them days? You know when they used to play 8 o'clock 20 on Sunday night on the BBC? And Top of the Pops on a Thursday night. Do you miss them days? I do.
Well, yeah. I mean, the thing is, it was a big event. I mean, Top of the Pops on a Thursday around about 7 o'clock on the BBC. I mean, it was a really big event at the time. And I think the other thing as well worth mentioning is the availability of music on the radio. I mean, Radio Luxembourg has been around since like the early 30s. But if anybody can remember those early days of Radio 208, and you'd listen to it under your bedclothes after you're supposed to have gone to bed, and the signal would just fade in and out, so you'd never catch a whole song. And then the BBC Light programme in the 50s and early 60s was the only music programme really on the radio, BBC Light programme, and that had very few pop programs. It had things like children's favorites, which was good, and then you've got a top 30 show. I think it was on a Sunday, and Saturday Club would be one of the real oasis where you'd actually hear pop, good pop music in the early 60s. And it wasn't until 64, I think it was, that Radio Cataline made the first of the pirate radio broadcasts, and for the first time, you've got 24-hour good quality pop radio, rock and roll radio, and it took the BBC and the British government 3 years till 67 to work out that there was a market and a need for it, and that's when Radio 1 started in 67. And you put that into context. I mean, the Beatles' first hit single in the UK was in the October of 62. 63, 64, 65 was when people like the Stones, the Animals, all the Mersey beat thing was going on. and the only official radio was the Light Service with a smattering of pop music programs. So it's no wonder really that there was such a revolution in the music scene when the pirate radio ships and stations started.
I think you're right there because, well, what we used to listen to as a kid was Radio Luxembourg, and that changed the old the whole aspect of music anyway. Jack Jackson, what was his name? Wasn't it? Yeah. Jack Jackson. And then, as you said, with Radio Caroline, you know, it was just music 24/7, and everybody was made up with that. Then on the telly, I always remember like going out with every Saturday night. Thank You Lucky Stars came on about 6 o'clock, and it put you in the mood, you know, to go out because you were going out with your mates. You know, everything was great then. And you had some, and the Jukebox Jury as well. That was on at the same time.
Yeah, that was the Saturday night one.
But don't you think that it put you in the mood, you know, to have a great night?
Yeah, you weren't, you know, apart from going in NEMS and putting the headphones on, listening to the record, you ain't getting nothing, were you? Before Caroline. And BBC must have, when Caroline came up, the BBC must have been terrified because, as you say, they introduced Radio 1 then.
Yeah. Well, it took them 3 years to rehash the BBC programmes from the Third Network, the Home Service and the Light programme to what we've got now. But that was great. You had some great TV shows around then as well. Ready, Steady, Go was great. The old Grey Whistle Test was very much the sort of thinking man's prog rock kind of pop music. So they had a lot of great.
Well, that old Grey Whistle Test, you had to play live, didn't you? There was no miming.
No, I'm pretty sure it was pretty much all live on the.
It was because Bob Harris turned around. He said one of the things he said, we only have live music. Yeah. That's all we have. We have no mimes. So what you're hearing is live. Yeah. And there was some great bands on there. There's Charlie Kane says, just hold on a sec because I need to read out these comments. Karen Karayaku says to her, Jared, stick a pie in your mouth.
Yeah.
Charlie Kane says, thought Brian Ferry was one of the first to do an album of old songs. Ian Forshaw says, hi Frank, I was in a Liverpool band called Caroline 199 who played every week in the Cavern. And Peter Locke says, and the 6-5 special on TV. I remember that.
Absolutely.
Okay, so we'll talk about that 6-5 special. I want to go back to Ian, to Charlie Cairns and Brian Ferry, and then Ian Forshaw, and a band called Caroline 199. Did you ever hear of them? No. Okay. What about Brian Ferry, who's, you know, Charlie Cairns said he thought it was the first one.
Yeah, that could well be one of the first, because I mean, what was happening as well? There was no nostalgia, you know. There was no. There was the cabaret circuit. So you know, when people ran out of being on the pop charts, you know, they take to the cabaret circuit, and the number of times you see various members of the Beatles and the Stones saying, you know, we know it's not going to last. Because what happened in the 50s, that rock and roll died away, and all the careers died away with them. And one of the first tribute concerts was probably around 1970 in America. And I remember that it was the British Invasion bands. So the British Invasion was like 64 when the Beatles went on the Ed Sullivan Show, and they really took off in a big way, and they blazed the trail then. And for the next 3-4 years, sort of through 65, British bands dominated the American scene. to the extent that some American bands were calling themselves British-sounding names, like the Beefeaters, and they didn't have any success as the Beefeaters. But about '66, they changed their name to the Byrds and became quite popular. So about 3 or 4 or 5 years, it might have been '71. I think it was at Carnegie Hall. There was a British invasion, a British reinvasion, I think it was called. And that was probably, you could almost say, the birth of bands reinventing themselves. I mean, people like the Searchers and the Foremost, I mean, they're on the road like pretty much every week of every month of every year. And, you know, they're not parodies of themselves. I mean, there is a big market. The people who grew up with the music still love that sort of music. And, you know, they, Manfred Mann and the like, you know, they all get really good audiences when they play the various concerts, often in theatres.
Oh yeah, I you know, getting back to what Peter Locke said there, the 6-5 special, was another fella named Don someone.
Don Lang, the house
Don
band
Lang,
was
that's
Don
him.
Lang's, I can't remember exactly, but Pete Murray, I mean, he was one of the first hosts, and he famously, the tagline was, "Time to jive on the old 6-5." And it started off with a train, a steam
That's
train,
how much it really- yeah. I remember
hurtling down
that.
the tracks. And yeah, there was Lord Rockingham's 11 as well. Cherry Wayner, I remember, was the organist. Yeah, Frantic Five, Don Lang's Frantic Five with the house band. And typically they covered, in that time, they were very much, British rock and roll was very much a pale imitation of American rock and roll. You know, I mean, Tommy Steele was the first British rock and roll star, and he had his first hit in '56 with Rock with the Cavemen. Marty Wilde in '58 had his first hit. And interestingly enough, Billy Fury's career started out thanks to Marty Wilde, because what happened is Larry Parnes was Marty Wilde's manager. And Billy Fury, he was a songwriter, which was quite rare in those days for a singer to write songs. He's written 2 or 3 songs and he put them on a tape. And he agreed with Larry Parnes that he'd go along to Birkenhead, to the Isolde, is it?
Yeah.
Meet them backstage. And what his hope, Billy Fury's hope, was that when Larry Parnes heard these songs on the tape, that Marty Wilde might record one of them. Well, what happened was that he listened to the tapes in the interval and he said, "Well, I like this. Why don't you open the second half of the show for us?" So Billy Fury, unprepared, went on and opened the second half of that particular gig. And Larry Parnes signed him up, changed his name from Witchley to Fury, because Larry Parnes was one of these guys who'd like to have artists with, you know, interesting sounding names like Marty Wilde, Billy Fury, Johnny Gentle.
Johnny Gentle.
And so that's how Billy Fury got going, because he was interesting, Billy Fury, because he was very much to the side of what was going on. I mean, very much a Liverpudlian, but you know, you wouldn't put him in the Mersey Beat camp as such. You know, he was his own man, if you like, ploughed his own furrow alongside what was going on, and he was very successful into the late 1960s. And Cliff Richard and the Drifters, of course, they started out. Drifters became the Shadows. They started out in '58 with Move It. So you know, it was an interesting time because the other side of British music in the '50s was skiffle, and that grew.
Yeah, I was just going to say that. But what about just before then? That I think that I don't know. You had the skiffle at Lonnie Donegan, didn't you? Yep. That's the only skiffle fella that I know. And then all of a sudden, you mentioned the likes of Marty Wilde and the likes of Billy Fury and Tommy
there
Steele.
was a lot of skiffle around. You got Beryl Bryden and the Backroom Skiffle group. Alexis Cornish was very much in the skiffle group. I mean, when he got together with Cyril Davis was running the London Skiffle Club on a Thursday night or whatever it was, the Roundhouse. And when he got together with Alexis Corner, who was very much in the blues side, they decided that they'd move away from skiffle and they formed a blues band. And he got Wally Whiten He was quite into all that, and that was all based on American rural blues. So I mean, Lonnie Donegan's both sides of his first single, Rock Island Line and Oh Henry, something like that. They were both lead belly songs. So it was an interesting.
What kind of rocking along, she's a mighty fine road, and all this, this sort of skiffly thing. Where did that come from all of a sudden? Was it a part of jazz? Because the Cavern Club was a jazz club.
Very much so. Ray Thingy, the first manager, he hated rock and roll. In fact, he sent John Lennon when the Quarrymen played there, and he played a couple of Elvis Presley songs. He sent a handwritten note to John Lennon on stage to say, "Cut out the bloody rock." So he tolerated skiffle. How skiffle came about was bands like Chris Barber and his jazzmen had what they call breakout skiffle groups, interval groups. So when the guys went to the bar or the pub or whatever they went during the break between a couple of sets, 3 or 4 of them would usually change instruments and then perform skiffle songs. So an awful lot of those started off as skiffle, as trad jazz interval groups. I mean, Chris Barber played upright bass in Lonnie Donegan's skiffle group, and Beryl Bryden was the one on the washboard. And skiffle was almost the punk of its day, in the fact that like anybody can be in a group, and a lot of the instruments were actually handmade. Like the bass was a tea chest with a broom handle and a single piece of string or rope, whatever. And that was sort of lifted them from some of the early blues, American blues sort of players. They used instruments like that, and things like the washboard as the percussion instrument. It was when your mum wasn't using it on a Monday to do the washing. It became the percussion element of the band, and that all developed. I mean, what happened was in America when rock and roll sort of fell away, golden age at the end of the 50s. In America, the scene fragmented completely. You had people like Dick Dale, rated as the first surf record with Let's Go Tripping, and then people like the Beach Boys, Chubby Checker with all the various dance crazes, the twist particularly, Phil Spector with his Wall of Sound. And of course there was a big folk revival going on in America. People like Dylan were really starting to come to the fore in the very early 60s, and the whole protest thing grew through the second half of the 60s, as very much driven by protest against the Vietnam War. But in the UK, it was completely different. The sort of skiffle stroke British rock and roll groups, they morphed into beat groups. And the big difference was the focus was no longer on the lead singer. The focus was very much on the group itself. And beat emerged from about 62. I mean, the Beatles, I think, probably had the first beat record. They didn't have the first beat single, though. Howie Casey and the Seniors from Liverpool, they released Double Twist in the January of 62. I mean, that's 10 months before the Beatles' Love Me Do. And Brian Poole and the Tremolos, they beat the Beatles to the record deal with Decca in the January of 62. So their first record came out in the April of 62. But it was another year or more before they had their first hit. So the Beatles should never be underestimated in terms of really their importance. A lot of people would argue they weren't the strongest group in Liverpool in the early days. I mentioned last time that Johnny Hutchinson reputedly was offered the job of replacing Pete Best, but turned it down because he thought the Big Three were a much better band. But there's just something about the Beatles, the right place, right time, tremendous talent, and from cracking the British charts. I mean, it was them that cracked the American charts for British artists. Up until then, there have been very few That was 64, January, I think, of 64. I Want to Hold Your Hand spent about 18 weeks at #1 in America because that was when Capitol Records picked up their option and decided to run with the Beatles. And it was after that that particularly the Mersey beat groups, I mean, they were to the fore in the British beat early days of 63. They were mostly people like Jerry and the Pacemakers, Billy J. Kramer, the Searchers. They all had hits following on the heels of the Beatles. I mean, people like the Stones, I mean, they were all before June of 63. If you look at the Stones, their first hit was in the July. Dave Clark Fives was in the October. And people like the Animals and the Kinks didn't have their hits until 64. So, you know, the Mersey beats element was an important factor, both in the British invasion, they had a majority of the early hits in America as well. So,
listen, do you know, you mentioned the Stones, was their first hit, I Want to Be Your Man?
No, Come On. It was a cover of Chuck Berry. I Want to Be Your Man, I think, was their second or third. It was the cover of the Beatles.
I'm glad you said that because it was only testing you, Derek. Anyway, listen, Derek, you know, before you leave us, before we go on to this thing, we do a clip, you know, a little bit of a history clip. Can you tell us more about your book, where to get it? Because I think it'll be an ideal Christmas present. Because there's loads of music lovers on here, and you know, going back into the past, you know, because it's really, it's like a bibliography, isn't it?
It is. It's very much pick it up, put it down. It's not start, begin, and read to the end. I mean, basically, it takes a look at what happened on this day. So when it was reviewed in Record Collector said that pretty much every event that would prove significant in the history of pop music is in the book. And that's because that's how it was written. You know, what if is it important? Yeah, let's put the story in the book.
So if you're doing a reference sort of thing, you know.
Absolutely. And it's
cross-referenced. Just go to that.
Yeah. The other thing, you can buy directly from my website, rockandrollunravel.com. But you can also get it on Amazon, and you can order it from any bookshop in the UK because it's Gardeners have got it on their lists. So you can walk into your local bookshop and just order it. If you PayPal, just buy it straight off the website.
I suppose my song's not in it, is it?
Sadly not, I think, Frank.
Yeah, I see that. Sadly not. Yeah. Not just like no.
You'd have an heard it then.
You know, a snigger like you.
Sadly not. You'd have an heard it then, Derek, have you?
No, I'm sure it's very good though.
Well, the next time you're on, I'll play it.
Brilliant! I should look forward to that.
What did that fella say to you at that Christmas party? You sound like a bit of coke trapped under the back door.
That's shocking.
I'll never forget that. You were awful upset over that, weren't you? Joe Leggett, it was, wasn't it?
Was that Joe Leggett?
Yeah.
Well, that's Amuse Gerard.
It's always does every time I think of it, Jared.
So you can. I think it's just called Rock and Roll Unraveled.
That's it. Yeah, Rock and Roll Unraveled. Yeah.
I think it'll be a fantastic. I really do. I'm not just saying that.
What's your song called? It might be in it, mightn't it?
I've asked him, and he said.
But he might have not read it.
An Angel on Earth.
That sounds like a good song. That sounds like a Eurythmics song, that.
What? Give me a minute.
No, don't. Shut up. You want them cotton wool, have you?
What? Hang on a minute.
Hang on a minute, Sarah. You're in for a surprise here.
Wouldn't you like me to sing "Why Must I Be a Teenager in Love"?
In love, oh, absolutely.
I'm good at that. I'm one of these people. I used to do a great impersonation of Dean Martin and
Frank Highfield.
Elvis,
Right.
and also the Big O. It was unbelievable, to be honest, what I used to do. But as someone says, it was like a bit of coke underneath the door.
Pratt.
I just want, before you go, just see what you
It
think
didn't do
of
Hank
it.
Marvin any harm, did it? With the Wandering Star.
Well, there you go, you see.
Yeah, but Eric, he's a big movie star, you know what I mean? He's only a little Facebook star.
I just hope I can get it here. Listen to this in 1 minute.
Oh, Scousology, I thought that's it, Scienceology.
My story is a true one of a lady who once lived. She was called the Hound of Heaven, gave all that she could give. Catherine was her given name, but the world was soon to know. She'd be known as Kitty, and a legend soon would grow. Oh, Kitty Wilkinson, you can imagine the world. Oh, Kitty Wilkinson, an angel on earth. What do you think of that?
That was great. I like that.
Thank you. Put us in your follow-up.
The music was good. That fella's talking on it though.
I tried to be like Big John. He weighed 6 foot. He's still 6'6", he weighed 245. Big John.
Yeah, absolutely. One of my all-time favourite songs.
Which my one or Big John?
Big Bad John.
Difficult to choose between them, mate.
Thank you. Thank you. I appreciate everything. Did you hear it clearly though?
Yeah, it was good.
Thank you.
He's taped it.
He's taped.
It'll be bootleg, mate.
Rock and Roll Unravelled Part 2.
1 page.
Exactly.
I want a brick in the cabin wall. That's what I want.
That'd be
Anyway, Derek, it's been super. It really has. And you're coming on again. Yeah.
Oh, yeah, lovely.
So what will you talk about the next time?
Frank Sinatra, because he never talked about him this time.
About what, sorry? I don't know. I'll think about it. Do you do any kind of Christmas special? We could do.
Oh, brilliant! Yeah. Can you come on a week?
Oh yeah, Christmas.
2 weeks tonight.
Christmas number ones.
Are you all right for 2 weeks tonight?
I would think so. Yeah.
And I'll give you my Christmas version of An Angel on Earth.
Cancelled.
Have you got your diary there? You're okay to come on?
Yeah, that should be fine.
So we'll do Christmas songs.
That's got to be working
Yeah,
out.
I'll look to do it a little bit of a look at what some of the Liverpool lads were up to as well around Christmas, because the Beatles have got some interesting Christmas stuff going on. I mean, look maybe at some of the backstories to some of the Christmas songs, because some of them have got quite interesting backstories. Things like the Pogues Christmas hit. That's got a great
brilliant! Yeah. I'll tell you one of my favourite songs. Honestly, well, two actually. One is by John Lennon.
Yeah.
Merry Xmas, Happy Xmas, War is over. I think that's brilliant. That.
Oh, it is good.
And also because that's an anti-war song, as you know.
Oh,
and also Wizard, Roy Wood.
Yeah.
I think that's absolutely
Oh,
brilliant.
that's a great song.
Christmas. So it's talk about them. I think it's going back,
Yeah.
as I said, or what I will say is going back to Bing Crosby
Yeah.
and White Christmas and the follow up from there right through.
Yeah.
What was his other two chart hits? I meant to ask you before. You know, you said he'd done White Christmas 6 times. Bing Crosby. What was his other two?
I can't remember offhand, to be honest.
An Angel on Earth. I did the cover version.
Wasn't little drummer boy with David Bowie?
No. And what's interesting, I mean, is he died in 1977, and White Christmas wasn't a UK hit until 1977. You know, your mind plays funny tricks on you sometimes. You think, I'll tell you the other really funny thing about White Christmas. I mean, it started off in a film called Holiday Inn, and the whole soundtrack of about 6 songs or 7 songs was released on 3 or 4 78s in the July. So White Christmas first hit the American charts in the summer of the year it was released, which I thought was
Go away. So it wasn't like released after Christmas.
Song, yeah.
No, it was a film called Holiday Inn. I mean, there was another. He built on the success of that. He did do another film called White Christmas, but that film itself, that song itself, comes from Holiday Inn.
That's brilliant, that.
Yeah,
that's absolutely brilliant. I remember that White Christmas because they were in a cabin, weren't they? And they were singing that.
Yeah.
With what's his name? Oh, what's his name? Danny Kaye. Danny Kaye, Rosemary Clooney, and some other one. Rosemary Clooney.
Kitty Wilkinson.
Anyway, Derek, we've got to play this clip. And see you in 2 weeks. We're looking forward to this, with the Christmas songs.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Thank you so much, Derek, once again. Thank you so much.